Stop it at the drop. How's everyone doing today? Wow, new intro. I thought, shake it up a bit. I didn't like the wobbly stuff too much. It was a bit weird. Um, so yeah, I went for something a bit fresh. Made it from a tutorial, admittedly online. But yeah, that's all my handiwork, and I think it came out quite nicely. So yeah, how are we doing today? Welcome, Claire. Welcome, Jovial Dane. Welcome, Trolley Dave. Nice to see you all here. If you are here and I haven't mentioned you, please do feel free to talk in the chat. We're all welcoming here. We like to have a bit of chat, a bit of banter. It's all fun and games until Luke starts crying on stream because he's been he's been bullied too much by the chat. So hi, Nidemos. And I can see answers in reason is in the chat as well. That's not me today. That is Joe, if he's here. Joe is answers in reason today. I am coming up as bearded heretic. So today we're going to be talking about cognitive distortions. The title of the show is Distorted Thinking, and we're going to be talking about what cognitive distortions are and specifically how they lead into offending behaviour. Because my master's degree is in forensic psychology, and that's what I know the most about, I suppose. So a lot of these are going to be forensic based, And we already talked about borderline personality disorder. We've already talked about eyewitness testimony. So I thought we'd talk about something a little bit different, cognitive distortions. So I guess the place to start is thinking about what cognition is. Because in order to understand cognitive distortions, we have to understand cognitions. And I think the best way to describe cognitions is just as any unseen mental process. So thought, feelings can be cognitions if they're kind of like thought patterns. Language is a cognition. How we translate language in our head, how we read and stuff, that can be a cognitive process. Memory is a cognitive process. All of that stuff is cognition. So it's any unseen mental process. So what is a cognitive distortion then? Oh, and by the way, guys, if you want to ask any questions as we go, feel free, because I am more than happy to answer questions. I can get your chats up on the screen, just like this, where Dave comments on the fact that he's a grumpy old man, which is accurate. So thanks, Dave, for that comment. Distortions in cognitions aren't necessarily what people think they are. They're not delusions. And when I describe them, they might sound like delusions. But I'm going to really break down what the difference is. So a cognitive distortion is a perceptual error or a belief about the world that isn't true. So what that means is something that usually they form in our schemas. So a schema is just a belief about how the world works. So a schema would be that, for instance, that all Frankie and Benny restaurants are rubbish, because they are. That's just a fact. Or it can be something along the lines of women are unknowable. That can be a schema. So the schema would be about women, and then that would be the cognitive distortion. And it kind of, what it is it's kind of like a distorted perception of reality. Not an untrue one. It's just how someone perceives it. And that's a real important difference between hallucination or a delusion and a cognitive distortion. So there's a really easy one to describe, which is called hostile attribution bias. So hostile attribution bias is where you perceive hostility where it isn't. So for instance, you're out at a club and someone spills a drink on you. Now, if you have hostile attribution bias, you attribute hostility to that act. You believe they did it on purpose. And that's a cognitive distortion. Whereas if you don't have that cognitive distortion, you might think, oh, well, they maybe tripped, and I was just there, and it was unfortunate. And what these kind of things can do is they can create, they can cause us to interact differently with the world. And actually, CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, is hi Joe, nice to have you here. Was actually designed to help people with their cognitive distortions, usually about themselves. So, I'm not good enough. I'm not good at my job. I'm not good at a good enough boyfriend. I'm not lovable. Those kind of things. So, if people have those thoughts, or they bias towards negative stimulus, then actually um, they have a cognitive distortion there, because the bias leads them to the cognitive distortion. Yeah. So that's what a cognitive distortion is. Now, some examples: hostile attribution bias is one. There's one which is the world is a dangerous place, and if people have this distortion, then and these are concepts. These aren't like thoughts that they have. They're not fully formed thoughts. So it's not like I think, oh, I think the world's a dangerous place, but they come out in our thoughts like that. People might be more hostile to people because they're being defensive, or they might go out and carry a blade with them because they're scared of people hurting them and stuff like that. I'm not. I'm reading. I'm reading the chat, and I'm looking at my screen to check I'm still in frame, and I'm looking at my camera. There's no cheat sheet. This is the chat here. This is my screen. This is the camera. How rude. um, Joe. Joe says, not many people know this, but Luke has cognitive distortions about my DJ skill. I say that Joe's a good DJ, so he's saying that my thoughts that he is a good DJ is distorted. So, the world is a dangerous place. People may carry weapons on them. People may be more hostile to people. It usually leads to that kind of needing to assert your authority. And this is what can cause a lot of people to actually become offenders, is that they're, like, especially violent offenders, is that they're being overly protective, and it comes out as them being aggressive. They are being aggressive, but the reason they're being aggressive is because they feel the need to assert their dominance in a place. So those kind of people that, they're like, did you look at me the wrong way? They're looking for fights, but not because they believe the world's dangerous. They believe if someone did look at them differently, look at them hostilely. I can't get my words out today. It's been a long day at work, guys. Look at them with hostility, then they need to prove that they're actually the person that's going to cause the trouble, rather than just be what's the word, like, sit back and just allow it to happen. Yeah. So that's kind of how a cognitive distortion about the world being dangerous would interact with someone. And just as a trigger warning, I will talk about a little bit about kind of SA and stuff like that, because it's relevant to this. Hi, Ginger. Nice to see you here. So within SA, there's a lot of cognitive distortion, and we call them myths. So they're called rape myths. And the myths are specifically around women, but there are some that are also around men. But obviously, the literature focuses on women as the victim, because women predominantly are the victim. So it looks into those details a lot. And some of the cognitive distortions you'll have there, or the myths. So parts of the schema are that women are unknowable, that women are sexual objects, that women are there for men's desires, that if she's wearing a short skirt, then she's trying to provoke me, that if they make eye contact with me, then they want to sleep with me. If they've slept with me once, then they'll want to sleep with me always. Those kind of things. They're myths, and they can get rooted into, especially in like kind of like a really patriarchal society, with the kind of culture that we have. Less so in the past few years, thanks to things like Me Too and stuff. But they can become quite entrenched in people's thinking patterns. And I think you can really see that in the incel movement. In the incel movement, they hold a lot of these myths um, about women. So that's what a cognitive distortion is, and that's how it impacts on people. If you have this belief, this entrenched belief about how the world works, and then you go out into the world, you are engaging with it with that belief as a lens to look at it through. That's essentially what it is. And we learn these myths through various different things, or these distortions through various different things. We can learn them through media. We can learn them through our parenting. Um, we can learn them through our peers. So this is, they kind of get inbuilt in us. Now they're not a part of our personality, which is why CBT is so effective against them. CBT therapy is very skillful at challenging these specific types of thought processes. And actually, when you do target them and you do address them, then you see a massive change in that person's behavior. But addressing them is difficult. It's not easy, and it's not a quick process. It's not one of those ones where you can go down for 8 sessions of CBT and then suddenly you're fine. It takes a long while to get this kind of like this different style of thinking actually put into somebody's mind. So yeah. So Joe says, not many people know this, but Luke is actually part Dalmatian. What are you trying to say? That I have lots of spots or something? I don't. And then Dave says, I'd say part tabby rather than Dalmatian. What the mouse murder and all. Yeah, this mouse just decided to die, so I had to go get a new mouse. Okay, I'm sorry. I prefer THC therapy. I didn't say CBD. Oh god! Every single time, guys. Every single time I do one of these, it always descends into drugs in the chat. Every single time, without fail. CBT therapy, Luke. What does CBT mean? Cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy is actually really interesting because it's really good therapy, providing the person engages with it. It doesn't just work automatically, but essentially it targets two things: cognitions and behavior. And the idea is that you got to imagine like this circle with a cross through it. We call it the hot cross bun because in the UK it resembles a hot cross bun. I don't know if they have hot cross buns in the US, but Google it if you don't know what a hot cross bun is. And essentially you have thoughts, physical feelings, so physical sensations, um, emotions, and behavior, and they all interlink. So you get arrows pointing to all of them, and then cross pointing to everything. So your thoughts can influence your emotions, which can influence your behavior, which can influence your physical feelings, and vice versa. Yeah. And what it does is CBT doesn't target emotions and it doesn't target physical feelings. What it targets is the cognitions and the behavior. So essentially, what it does is it either or both. It can either get you to behave differently in order to change your thinking patterns. So, say you're like, I'm so depressed. Sorry, that sounded mocking. I didn't mean it in a mocking way. Say you're like, I'm so depressed, I can't leave bed. What the CBT therapist will do is say, okay, I understand that you feel that way and that you feel like you're unable to leave your bed because of how you feel. Try leaving your bed. Try getting up. Try going to do some exercise, even if it's just a small amount. And what that can do is that can trigger. Um, sorry, I get distracted so easily by the chat. What that can trigger is like a response in your body because it's kind of like a negative cycle. So the more you think you can't leave the bed, the more you'll stay in bed, which means you justify your belief that you can't leave the bed, and it goes in a cycle. So if you break that cycle by behaving differently, then actually your thoughts will start to change because you'll think, oh, I got out of bed today. I did some exercise today. That's a win. I'm feeling better. And then you're kind of tricking your brain, you're tricking your thoughts into being more positive. Now, the other way it works is the reverse. So you have this thought, I can't get out of bed, and therefore you stay in bed. So they'll try and target the thought instead. And the thought would be something along the lines of, they'll try and make it a specific thought that comes into your head. So I can't get out of bed because um, uh, I'm scared of what will happen or something. And what they'll do is they'll do something called cognitive reprogramming, which sounds technical, but it's essentially just swapping out the negative thought for a more positive thought. So it would be like, so instead of thinking I can't leave the bed, you'll think some along the lines of like, I have the power to leave the bed. Yeah, something more positive and empowering. And then it doesn't work straight away, obviously, because it's a reprogramming process. And it is more complex than this. This is just a very simple, uh, like, version of it. So you'll think this new thing. Every time you have that thought, you try and think of it differently. You might keep a thought record in order to keep track of this stuff, and then eventually your thoughts will become more positive and you'll be able to leave the bed because you are feeling more positive in your thoughts. Yeah, because that impacts your emotions and your physical feelings. So it's very good at targeting cognitive distortions, because if you have someone who says, who thinks the world is a dangerous place, and you start to reprogram those cognitions into it's not as dangerous as I thought, or there's lots of safe places, and stuff like that, then eventually people's thoughts will change and then their behavior will change when they interact with people. Most people aren't dangerous, for instance. That could be a new thought. And then they'll start to focus on those other people. They'll start to focus on people and thinking that they're not dangerous, and then they won't be so aggressive towards them, trying to assert their dominance and trying to make sure that they're the ones that are the one that strikes first, for instance. So it's very interesting. CBT works really well for that, and I'm glad to see that a couple of people have had a really good experiences with CBT. Very good. What do you find more effective, CBT or NLP? So NLP, for those who don't know, is neuro-linguistic programming. So it's a system that's developed in order to make you associate with certain things. So if I'm having a conversation with you, it's a very simple explanation. Every time I say a certain word, I might tap the table. And when I tap the table, you're starting to be conditioned towards that word or the concept that word gives. And then eventually, I don't have to say the word for you to associate it with the tap on the table. And then when I tap the table, you'll feel that feeling, or you'll feel like you'll be reminded of that concept. I would have to say CBT, because I think it's more neuro-linguistic programming tries to be, what's the word? Covert. It tries to be something that can be done to someone without them realizing. Whereas CBT is very much an involved process. Someone is making an active attempt to change their thought processes. And I think any therapy is way more effective when somebody is making an active effort to engage in it. In fact, pretty much any therapy is effective. Basically the highest indicator for whether a therapy is going to work is engagement by the person. Now, there are other things, like if you had a fully engaged group of people doing CBT and a fully engaged group of people doing counselling therapy, and the people who were doing counselling therapy didn't have much emotional trauma in their childhood, the CBT will be more effective because it's targeting the right things. Whereas if they did have that trauma in their childhood, then CBT may be less effective because you need to resolve that trauma before people can move on. So they have their own things that they target. But generally speaking, it is an involved process. And yeah, Joe says I use NLP techniques on myself when feeling anxious. I don't think that they're useless. I think that they have usage. I just think as a therapy, like maybe, as a coping strategy, NLP could be quite good. But as a therapy, I think CBT is better. So yeah. And hi, Sandy. Nice to have you here. Ooh, we've got lots of people to say. 9 people watching. And only 5 likes. What? Well, 6 likes now that I've liked it. I've liked my own video. Yeah, I'm a loser, but now we've got 7. That's good. So yeah, CBT is interesting, and CBT can help with these cognitive distortions. Um, and I personally think cognitive distortions is one of the biggest areas that lead to um, offending behavior. Because I think that our perception of the world and our perception of ourselves existing in the world has a massive influence on how we treat others, um, how we interact with other people, how we expect ourselves to act, um, and I think that it can actually um, lead to large scale kind of problems such as the incel movement, um, extremist behavior in certain communities such as religious communities, um, and even things like mass murder. And the reason that I come up with this chat is because I was having this topic is because I was having this discussion with someone, and they were talking about delusions and how delusions are what lead to religious people bombing abortion clinics and stuff like that. Now, this is where people get confused, and I think it's very important. This is a really important point. A delusion has to be based on delusional grounds. So somebody's belief in something, not in the face of evidence, is not enough for it to be classed as a delusion, right? So if someone believes something, you give them a bunch of evidence, and then they still don't believe it, that's not a delusion, right? Maybe in a colloquial sense, yeah, that counts. But in terms of psychology and psychiatry, that's not what it is. A delusion would be someone believing that, um, you know, I believe that I'm Jesus uh, because, I don't know, because I've had signals come through the TV and tell me that. Yeah, that would be a delusion. A delusion would be MI5 are tracking me, and I know this because uh, when I came downstairs this morning, my shoes weren't in the same place that they were when I left. Yeah, that's a delusion. And delusions have literally no evidence. And we got to think about this. Like, what do we mean by in the face of evidence? Well, why would someone be tracking somebody else? Why would MI5 be tracking you? What evidence do you have for it? My phone ran a bit slower than normal. They must have put a bug in it. Delusion. I've met people whose delusions they thought their parents were replaced by aliens or robots. Those are two different people, by the way. One was aliens, one was robots. Yeah, and he didn't. His parents would come visit, and he was like, "I don't want to talk to them. They're not my parents. They're aliens." Yeah, a delusion is not believing um, a socially acceptable, culturally uh, prevalent ideology, which is perpetuated through uh, relationships and social norms. That was a long sentence. Hi, godless scum, and nice to see you here. That's not what delusion is. People who are religious tend to be religious for rational reasons, as in they've reasoned to it, um, or born into it, and then they get explained why this is true, why this makes sense, and then they believe it. They get taught it. They got taught, so it's not a delusion. Okay, what it could be though is a cognitive distortion. If they think homosexuals are sinful and dirty and lustful and etc., those could be cognitive distortions because their belief about um, homosexuals is um, distorted from the reality of what homosexuals are like. Gay people can be loving, kind, generous. They can consent to their relationships and all that stuff. So it's a distorted schema of the world. The schema is based in Christianity or whatever religion it is, and their view on a certain subgroup of people is distorted through the lens of that. So it's a cognitive distortion instead, not a delusion. And cognitive distortions are not a psychiatric condition. They're not mental illness. That's really key as well. A mental illness is something that causes distress or discomfort in someone's life due to psychological pathology. Now, somebody can have distress and discomfort in their life due to cognitive distortions, but there's no pathology there. It's just the way that they think about the world. It's their beliefs, yeah? And their beliefs may not match up to society or to the reality of what's going on, but that doesn't mean it's a delusional belief. It just means it's a distorted view of the world. And we probably all have cognitive distortions. Yeah, we probably all have beliefs that aren't quite accurate about the world. We probably have, like, I don't know, maybe we support Southampton and we think they're really good, but they haven't won any games. I'm gonna get shit in a second. But that's the point, do religious beliefs increase, decrease, or neutralize distorted thinking? I have my own thoughts, but want to know yours. That's a tough question. I think that this is going to be a real cop-out answer, so apologies. But I think it depends on the person, because I know many religious people who have the exact same stances as me in various things. I think maybe in America it does increase cognitive distortions or distorted thinking because you have a bunch of people who are being essentially taught that certain subgroups of society are bad, and that thinking is based on distorted thinking, in my opinion. Well, no, distorted thinking because they don't have an accurate representation of what that community is actually like. Another community which has cognitive distortions is the trans exclusionary radical feminist TERFs community, which is, I think they call themselves gender critical now, where they believe myths around the trans community, where they'll say things like, people can't change their biological sex, they can't change their chromosomes. Well, I haven't met a trans person who believes that they can. They're dysphoric. They know it's a psychological like difference between how they feel they are compared to what their body is telling them they are. Now, for me, it makes sense that our minds are who we are, so people will go with their minds over their body. If I feel like I am a woman in my mind, then that's more compelling to me than what my body is, and that's where you get it. And so that's why gender is a weird construct, and gender is largely based on social constructs anyway. And I know, Dave, I hate social constructivism a lot of the time, but gender is a social construct because we see how different cultures and societies approach gender in different ways, and the way we view gender in the UK and the US is very westernized, and it's very rigid compared to a lot of other cultures. Godless Scammer says, thanks, Luke, and gives me 3 middle fingers because he supports Southampton. Dave says, as an atheist, I have no distortions. I'm based entirely in logic and reason. I'm not putting that up, Joe. Anecdote: God belief that all things are in the plan. Therefore, you ought accept any perceived suffering. The non-theist does the same thing. Life sucks, but I'm not dead yet. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think there is a reasonable amount of distorted thinking in religious beliefs, but then again, there is a lot of distorted thinking in atheist circles as well. This overwhelming belief that atheists are more rational, are more. It goes back to this: are more rational, are more intelligent, are more have opened their eyes. When you start to dissect their understanding of science, and you start to dissect their understanding of what religion is and how it's different across the world, they don't know. They don't have this knowledge there. And when you start to ask them questions that are quite tough to answer for an atheist, they don't have an answer. And so they get put into a defense mechanism they're because what when these cognitions are there, when we are challenged on them, it's not easy. It's not easy to challenge our thought processes, our natural thought processes. It's difficult. It's a difficult thing to do. So it's one of those things where um, people become defensive when their ideologies and cognitions are challenged. An ideology is a type of cognition, in my view, because an ideology is based on a bunch of thought processes that link together, essentially. So if you're taught, for instance, that, like, let's think about an ideology, or let's use the incel movement, because I think it's really topical at the moment and it's easy. They have an ideology. Their ideology is that women are only essentially women are objects of sex. Um, Women aren't interested in them because they are uh, not they're the nice guy, so they're not interested in them because they women only want to go for the nasty or the bad boy kind of thing, and the incels hate women because they refuse to sleep with them. Essentially, right now that's a really boiled down view. There's a lot of intricacies within there, but um, essentially all of those are individual distortions. So there's a distortion that women are sex objects of sexual uh, objects of sex. There's a distortion there that women only go for bad guys. There's a distortion there that they're the nice guy. There's a distortion there that women won't sleep with them because they're not the bad guy. Right? Multiple distortions, and then they make up an ideology. Okay. Now, ideologies can be based in fact as well. Um, there are ideologies that are based in fact, but a lot of distortions goes into these kind of ideologies, which are a bit more um, kind of uh, anti-fact, I guess. And a lot of people who are looking on the outside will be like, why, how can someone believe that? That must be delusional thinking because they're being shown evidence to the contrary and they're not believing it now. Flat Earth is based on ideology, based on cognitive distortions. The distortion being that the government can't be trusted. The distortion, well, I mean, the government can't be trusted, but in that area, the government can't be trusted at all. The distortion being that scientists are untrustworthy, essentially. There's lots of things. Yes, Dave, Brexiteers are cognitively distorted. There's a distortion about Britain being superior. There's a distortion about um, uh, the intentions of people not from this country and their intentions on our welfare state. There's distortions about um, how uh, how the law works, essentially, and what we can get from it. There's a lot of distortions there. So cognitive distortions are I can't remember what I was saying, but yeah, I'm sure the point got across. That's what's going to happen to me all the time. Um, it was just an interesting way to dissect both paradigms and see techniques operate in the same way. Thanks for letting me contribute. I agree. Yeah, I think that this is the thing. If you get anyone that's at an extreme opinion, they tend not to dissect their own opinions in the way that people who are more central do. I think extreme opinions are usually based on distorted thinking. They're usually based on um, bias thinking, and cognitive bias is a form, or unconscious bias is a form of cognitive distortion. Because if I see every, I don't know, trying to think of an example, every woman in the world, and I think they're all just wanting the bad boy, right? That's bias, because that's not true, right? So people have these biases, and then the more biased you are, the more extreme your opinion in one direction is. And that's why getting like a real mix of sources of information allows you to step out of that bias and allows you to see things for what they are. Because most people are, in my opinion, kind, caring, compassionate. They're usually quite reasonable, and they want to do what the best in their life. They're not interested in hurting other people, and they're not interested in going out of their way to harm people. Now, what can lead a normal person to harm someone? An ideology. You know, people who voted for Brexit, and no offense if anyone voted for Brexit in this, a large part of the group of people who voted for Brexit voted out of fear. Voted out of the fear that was given to them by people who were running the Brexit campaign. Fear that was unjustified. They had a cognitive distortion implanted in their head. They became fearful of the outcome of it. They became fearful of foreigners, and fearful of the way the EU and what the EU's plans were. And they decided fearful that we weren't going to have our sovereignty, and they decided to vote to leave. You know, and I think it's the same in atheism and religion. You know, you get a lot of decisions being made based on these emotions that are delivered through cognitive distortions. I do detest it all, never thinking, yeah, but we see it all the time, don't we? We see it all the time. You know, it's very damaging, I think, and I think that if I sat down and had a conversation with a Christian, most Christians, most of them would be reasonable, most of them would be kind, most of them would be caring. Some of them might have problematic beliefs that I wouldn't agree with, but they wouldn't act on them. They'd kind of just have them, but kind of just get on with their lives and let other people get on with theirs, right? Now, in America, that's different. There's a much bigger group of Christians that are militant in the way that they run things and stuff. But it is, you could probably have, other than their like Christianity, if we take that out of the equation, you could probably have a reasonable conversation with them because they're not distorted in other areas of their life, right? It's just this one area. Claire says in the US we have had that often, yeah, that kind of thinking. Luke, love you, buddy. Got to shoot. I'll catch the rest of. Love you too, Joe. Have a good evening. Enjoy your dinner. I'm assuming that's what you're going to do now. Dave says, and some of them would be Darth Dawkins. Yeah, some of them would be. He's very militant. But I'm not going to summon him by putting his name on the screen. Don't summon Darth Dawkins. What's this comment? There was an old man named Aaron. His epistemology was rather barren. His logic was bare. We found it nowhere. Makes me think he's an atheist Karen. I wonder if Joe just come up with that, or if he's had that in his pocket for a while, because that was quite good. So yeah. So the other aspect of this we got to think about is how this relates to offending, because that's really what I want to talk about. We can talk about atheism and religiosity all day, but how it relates to offending. Now, we've spoken a little bit about violent offending and about like how the dangerous world kind of, we call it the dangerous world hypothesis, and the point is not that it's an actual hypothesis, it's that they have this hypothesis in their mind that the world is dangerous. They're basically, because a hypothesis is an assumption about reality, an assumption that we can test. They have this assumption about this world that is dangerous. Another interesting thing is like around fire setting. So fire setting is not necessarily arson, because arson is a specific type of fire setting offense. But all types of fire setting, people who offend by setting fires tend to almost always have a fascination with fire as a part of their cognition. So they have this kind of like larger fascination with fire than the average person. Now, Teresa Gannon and her team at the Trevor Gibbons unit in Kent has done loads of research, and actually at the University of Kent in Canterbury, has actually done loads of research into this, and they've developed this multifactorial fire setting inventory. I think it's called. I think it's called that. And the key thing, so they did loads of research, and there's these other fire setting predictors essentially, or risk assessment models. And none of them actually broached the subject of fire setting. Like a lot of them skirt around the edge, and they go into like lots of weird little details and stuff. And they did like loads of research, and they did basically a meta-analysis, which is a so for those of you that don't know, a meta-analysis takes all the results from multiple studies, like potentially hundreds, maybe 50, maybe 20, and it puts them all in, and it comes out with a result about what factors influenced the results essentially. And they found in the meta-analysis that fire fascination was a key aspect that was missing in these other risk assessment tools, and so they put it into theirs, and it's a central focus. So you can have all these other little factors that go around. You can have like other types of offending behaviors, such as like vandalism and stuff. You can have poor impulse control. You can have trauma in childhood or abuse in childhood. You can have all of those things, and they link together. But the core middle factor is fire fascination. Now, fire fascination is a distorted thinking pattern, because usually people that have fascination with fire have distorted beliefs around their involvement with fire. They might believe that they can control the fire. They might believe that fire isn't as dangerous as people make it out to be. They might believe that fire is good for sending a message or stuff like that, right? And those all link into this kind of larger schema, which is fascination with fire. It's a bit more in depth than that, but fascination with fire. And if they have that, then they're more likely to be a fire setter than not. And if you have all these other factors around, they could be a violent offender but not a fire setter. They could be a sexual offender but not a fire setter. So there's these other aspects that go into it. That's the key. I think that's really interesting, because then you have something to target in your therapy with them. Once they've been incarcerated or however they've been treated, you can do therapy. You can do cognitive behaviour therapy about those aspects of their schema, and break it down so that they can be like, actually, I can't control fire. Actually, fire is really dangerous. Actually, it's not very good for sending a message, etc. You can break down those individual cognitions, reprogram them, and have them think slightly differently about it, which is great, And then because of that, Teresa Gannon and her team developed these fire treatment programs called the FIP and the FIPMO, which is the fire. I can't remember what the. Oh, now I will need a cheat sheet, Dave. I will need a cheat sheet now. Oh, come on. Yeah, I know who Teresa Gannon is. Just tell me what the FIP stands for. This is embarrassing. The Fire Setting Intervention Program. Yeah, that's it. So they have the FIPMO as well, which is the Fire Setting Intervention Program for mentally disordered offenders as well. FIPMO. I don't know why they called it FIPMO and not FIPMD, but they called it the FIPMO, mentally disordered. Yeah. And these treatment programs are quite effective, and they're still researching them and honing them at the moment, and it's good. So, Sandy says, my distorted thinking comes up as a big ugly monster that condemns myself when I'm not the all-loving creature I want to be, and that is very distorted. It leads to self-harm. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and I hope that you've worked through some of that stuff, and if not, then don't sit with those feelings. Tell someone. I think self-harm is one of those things that it can come out in many different ways. It doesn't just have to be like intentional, like infliction, but it can be disorganized behavior. It can be putting yourself into dangerous positions. So if you're doing any of that stuff, just make sure you're talking about it to someone who you trust, whether that's online or in real life. And if you need it, then seek medical help, because those kind of thoughts are not very pleasant. So, but yeah, that is distorted thinking. Lots of people have this. I think this is not uncommon, actually, that people. I mean, I recently had it at work. I got criticized by some external professionals, not internally, probably justifiably, because there was some work outstanding that I needed to complete, or some more about communication. Actually, my communication wasn't maybe as good as I thought it'd be, and then that's when my distorted thinking come out, and I was thinking, I'm not good at my job. I'm not the right person to be doing this. I'm kind of like, and you get that imposter syndrome kind of thing coming in. Now I've worked really hard to get rid of that. I know where my flaws are, and I can manage it, so it's fine. Like I was fine, but it's just that you have moments where you think that's not. You kind of becomes overwhelming, and it is distorted thinking, because if you look at the evidence, you look at the things that are there. I'm sure you are as loving as you can be, Sandy. I'm sure you're a very kind person, and everyone slips up in that area. I had a big fight on Twitter yesterday where I said some things I would not normally say because I was angry, and I was like, I want to be someone who responds to people that are calling me names or not acting in the way that I want. I want to be someone who responds to that with style and with like a gentleman, and just pars it off and talks about the subject at hand. And usually I am. I think I'm pretty good at that. But certain things trigger me, and I was triggered yesterday, and I got mad, and I said some mean things to people, but not as mean as what was said to me, I think. And yeah, cut yourself some slack, Sandy. Show yourself some kindness. If DD has to be mentioned, I move that we apply the math big rule and refer to him as arsehole 104. I mean, I don't think we have a list yet, so he can be arsehole number 1 here, because we only have. I don't think we have a list here. Yeah, okay, Dave. Point proven. Okay, Dave, I'll leave that to you. Sandy, it's disorganized behavior. Yeah, and that can be quite difficult sometimes. When you feel like just everything's in chaos. Yeah. So talk to someone, please, Sandy. Yeah, talk to someone you trust. I haven't seen show up in YouTube chats for a long time now. I think he just sits in Discord all day now. He has a pretty cool voice, though. That's the one thing I'd say about DD, or also one. He has a cool voice. I feel like a lot of Americans have like unreasonably cool voices. A lot of Americans don't, but a lot of Americans do. I want to be the king of the swing, the jungle VIP. Claire, understandable when reputation and truth are involved. I think we can give you grace. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's just about your self-image, isn't it? We all have distortions around our self-image, I think. The most extreme would be something like dysphoria or dysmorphia, where you see yourself very differently to how other people see you, or you feel very different to how your body is. Um, those are really difficult distortions to have. So yeah. Um, so I think, as I said, cognitive distortions are linked to group behavior, because as soon as you get a group of people, you kind of get this in group out group bias going on. So excuse me, I'm gonna have some fridge quickly because I'm super cool. I got a strawberry one. It's with the meal deal, so just gotta try and not get in my beard. I don't want a milk tash. It's the tastiest milkshake around. Um, so if you have a bunch of people who have similar distortions because of, I don't know, like upbringing, certain group dynamics, you know, gang behavior uses a lot in about kind of reputation and about feeling valued. You know, I think gang behavior is largely around socioeconomic things, and actually in the UK, gang isn't usually race based or anything. It's usually to do with the gangs usually resemble the like the demographics of the area, except for age. Usually, it's young people, but in terms of the wider demographics of like race and stuff, and it's usually men. So, but like race and um, socioeconomics, there's usually the demographics of the area. Um, but gangs are a socioeconomic thing. You tend to get in poorer areas with less resources, you tend to get more gang behavior. And the reason for that is because of a lack of feeling worth, a lack of feeling um, important. So they develop their own, essentially, they develop their own social structure to compensate for that, where value and worth and money is made through illegal means. And they kind of make their own rules. Um, and that extends to the prison system once they're in prison and stuff like that as well. Um, and they're based off of these cognitive distortions. So in order to that status is achieved through power and through force rather than through uh, like kind of like social growth in the larger scale of things. Now, I kind of, but they also believe the world is a dangerous place, but they also kind of set the world up to be a dangerous place because of their actions. So it's not entirely unjustified, but you know, most people live in a world that is mostly safe, right? In their minds, most people can go out and about and not be too concerned most of the time. You know, late at night is a bit different, um, but with gangs, it's not the way. Yeah, so and that kind of leads into the group behavior, and then you get out group uh, distortions where anyone outside of this group can't be trusted. Anyone outside of this group is less than, and this is actually kind of the kind of thinking that led to um, things like the Holocaust, where large swathes of the German population were kind of led to believe that Jewish people were animalistic, that they were money grabbing, that they were had an agenda to. They were trying to control the media and had an agenda to set up their new Israel, etc. All these kind of like things that we're still seeing today, these anti-Semitic things, um, and they were led to believe this stuff um, in order to justify, well, essentially to be a fall guy for the impact of World War One on the German economy and an easy target for Hitler to step on in order to get power and to achieve his goals. So And you're seeing that today with that. I think that's kind of what Brexit was to a certain extent, less extreme extent potentially, but still to an extent. The alienation of a group of people in order to achieve power. Certainly is what it was, um, and it gets into people's heads, and then you have this big in group, and the out group becomes so dehumanized that atrocities committed against them become acceptable in that society. Now, that doesn't mean that they're acceptable objectively speaking, but within that society, they become acceptable because of these cognitive distortions, which grow into an ideology, which grow into group dynamics, and how groups of people, social groups, interact with other social groups that are outside of that. And we're seeing it with the LGBT community. We're seeing it with trans people, especially at the moment, where um, there's this ideology forming around what it means to be trans that isn't accurate. Um, and we saw it with gay people in the 90s and noughties, prior to them having a few more rights than they do today. Not that everything's perfect now, but I suppose it's better. People have moved their attention now, I think, to trans people instead. And it can cause real big issues in terms of criminal behavior as well, because you get gangs. Um, and really, these psychological kind of back doors have been manipulated by people for hundreds of years, and they're being manipulated today as well. And we can see it in cult behavior as well. Cults will use these cognitive distortions. They'll implant thoughts into your head. Your family don't care about you. Uh, they're just trying to control you and manipulate you. Um, they're not worth your time. We love you. We care about you. We're worth your time. Cult behavior, actual cults, not like some of the atheists who just label any religion a cult and label any kind of group a cult. No, I'm talking about actual cults. They will separate you from your family and provide cognitive distortions for you to be able to justify that yourself, like it was your own idea. Kind of like Inception a little bit. They'll guide you down a path of these thoughts to produce an ideology in your brain. And what they'll do is increase your cognitive load whilst they're doing that to make it so that it's harder to resist it. It's harder to think critically about it. So they'll get you doing lots of work. They'll get you being tired. They won't let you sleep that much in order to make these cognitive distortions stick. This is really key because, this is a very simple concept that has a massive impact on people's lives and can actually be quite detrimental to them. And you see it in people like Flat Earth as well, I think I've already talked about Flat Earth, so I won't talk about that too much. But these people have this mistrust that's generated by someone else. Yeah. As I wrote, I know where it comes from. Well, it's good to know where it comes from. If there's, I think with this kind of thing, having some sort of counselling is really good. Could help you kind of like process that trauma and to be able to heal from it more effectively. So I don't know if you've had therapy, but I would recommend it if it's available to you. Some people can't afford it, and that's really sad. I think preventative therapy is something that everyone should be able to get, and it's much better now than it used to be. Perfect, and I know that CBT helped you. That's good. Godless Scummer says, "Oh, before that, Sandy. Yes, I have. Good. Or have more. You can never have too much therapy. Or certain Christians who think atheism is a destructive cult. Claire View knows who I am. Hashtag Dr. Evil. I mean, yeah, that's built on right. So that's built on the ideology of Christianity. That comes from preservation of the ideology. So in order to preserve the ideology, you need to stop people from accessing material from outside of that ideology. Now, most Christians, I don't think, have this as an issue. Most Christians can access atheist material fine, and they're not prevented from doing so by anybody. However, there are a large group in America of Christians um, who will uh, have that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought again. What was I saying, guys? Someone prompt me with a reminder. There's a large group of Christians. Oh, who will prevent people from accessing material outside of the religion? Right? They'll say that that's temptation from the devil, or that is gonna persuade you away from Jesus and from salvation. So don't do it. Um, and they'll rely heavily on this faith-based stuff. Um, so that's kind of like that's real indoctrination. Yeah, so indoctrination is banded about a lot as well, and I just like this too because as a psychological concept, it's really important to note that a major part of indoctrination is limitation around resources. So if a Christian family simply teach their child that Christian values are good and that somebody should believe in Christianity, but then say, read what you want about evolution, or read what you want about from atheist philosophers, or read what you want about this. That's not indoctrination because they're allowing that person to make a decision based on the information that's being provided. They set that person up, but I would guarantee you that most atheists set their kids up to be atheists. Just not even actively necessarily, just by virtue of being an atheist themselves. Because children are going to copy the ideologies of their parents because that's a safe bet. You copy the ideologies of your culture. So if if you're doing that, then that's not indoctrination. If you say, "Oh, you can go read the Bible, but I don't believe in it," right? And likewise, it's not indoctrination to say, "I read the Bible, you should read the Bible, but you can read what you want and see what your thoughts are." And I'm not going to hate you if you're an atheist. I'm not going to shun you. So there you go. And it's interesting to me that lots of atheists shun atheists that then become Christian. They shun them. They reject them from their thing. They don't try and have a conversation about what changed their mind or anything. So, yeah. Sandy says, I don't trust the people up here, not the healthcare system or the therapists. Another bad experience. Is that through insurance or is that because Sandy, are you American? I'm presuming you're American. If that's through insurance, then it's not much choice. But there are other options like BetterHelp. I've heard it's quite good actually if you get the right therapist, and that's all online and stuff. And there are also other online resources for CBT stuff. So if you need a refresher, you can use online CBT resources and stuff like that. CBT technically doesn't require a therapist, although I think that's cutting corners because you need someone to kind of teach you how to use it. But there's other options. You know, you don't just have to go with your local person. But I understand that would be problematic. Also, Sandy, no need to apologise. I think what you're saying is extremely valid, and I'm appreciating it, and I'm hoping that I'm giving some good thoughts for you to think about. Sorry. In this particular case, it's just that guy's a dick. Oh, there's lots of guys that are dicks on Twitter. Oh my goodness. I am, and I live in North Carolina, which is in the south, and the medical field is flooded with theists. Yeah, that's problematic because you need to be able to talk openly and honestly, and not have them interject their belief system into their therapy. And actually, that would be unethical. Like, you know, when I'm having conversations with people, if I'm doing like an intervention or something with someone, and they're talking about religion, it would be unethical for me to talk about the fact that I believe gods don't exist, or the fact that I believe that, you know, that whatever Christian thing there is. The only time that it wouldn't be unethical is if they're being bigoted and if they're saying, you know, gay people are sinners and horrible and should die and stuff, which is, you know, where I'd step in and say that's not okay. But I wouldn't even do that from an atheist position. I'd do that from a secular position And I'd say, regardless of what your beliefs are, that person has a right as a citizen of the United Kingdom to live how they want to live, and it's legal for them to live that way. And you cannot, it's illegal for you to be bigoted towards them, and you cannot judge someone based on that factor of them. Now, it may not change their mind in terms of like how they think about people, because that's a complex process, as I've said. But hopefully, it will change their mind about how they act towards people and how they should be kind, regardless of who they're talking to, even if they don't agree with their lifestyle. And if I could, if it was ethical, I would challenge that as well. But there's a line, kind of a line that I have to draw, a really careful line, about when I might be overstepping my boundaries as a somebody doing interventions. Certainly, I wouldn't stand for any kind of bigoted language in my sessions, and I haven't. That's because former atheists were never truly atheists. I know you're joking, but this is a real big annoyance. I find this really annoying because it's like people will celebrate Christians turning into atheists. They're like, "Oh yeah, you've seen the light and stuff. You're rational," and this is a distortion. This is a distortion because this is the premise that theism or a belief system can't be a rational position, and someone can't be rationalized into believing. Now, just because it doesn't make sense to them doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. And just because it doesn't make sense to them doesn't mean it doesn't make sense to other people. Yeah. we're biased in thinking that we hold the most sensible position. Christians are biased in thinking that they hold the most sensible position. Muslims are biased in thinking that they hold the most sensible position. Buddhists are biased that people wouldn't be these things if they didn't think that it was rational and if it didn't make sense to them. The fact that it makes sense to them shows you that it's rational. Now, or shows you that they've rationalized it, because they can explain why these things, why they believe these things. You don't ask a Christian, why do you believe in God, and they have literally no answer. They usually say, well, I experienced a near-death experience, and God spoke to me in like the kind of like hallucinatory state. They don't say hallucinatory, but that's what I think it is. God spoke to me in this state whilst I was, in a coma. Or they'll say, well, I had a really challenging childhood, and then I prayed, and then it turned around. Or they'll say, I was quite a lonely person, and then I joined Christianity, and now I have lots of friends and stuff. It might be something as pragmatic as that, right? And I don't think atheists can get that stuff. And the problem is atheists really struggle to actually explain their position anyway. Usually when you say, why are you an atheist? They'll say, well, I just don't believe in God. Expand. And then, you can kind of get something out of them, but usually it's a bit defensive because they're kind of like, they're like holding off because they haven't necessarily fully formed the idea. They had an inkling that they didn't believe in God. They might naturally feel that way, and that's okay. People can naturally feel that way, but then when they're saying that they're the most rational group, it's like well, you haven't really thought this through, have you? And even if they say, oh yeah, well, evolution and stuff, it's like, well, evolution doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. So there you go. Not holding a belief in God doesn't automatically make anyone rational. Yeah, exactly. Or intelligent. There was a study that Pew did. I can't find it now. I found it ages ago. And there was a slight difference, a very slight improvement in intelligence for atheists as opposed to Christians and Muslims, etc. Theists, essentially. Very slight. It was like 2% or something, or like 2 points of average intelligence, and it wasn't even one standard deviation. So, like, if you did a statistical test on it, it wouldn't be significant anyway. But also, the rationale for that is that the status quo is religiosity, essentially. So people who um, tend not to be good at critical thinking, like really not good at critical thinking, will believe by proxy, essentially. And then intelligent people will either um, become atheists or remain Christians, right? And it's just that those people who are maybe less skilled at critical thinking are more likely to be religious. But that doesn't mean that everyone who's an atheist is more intelligent than everyone who is a theist. They tend to have the same curve. Hi, Lone Wolf. I don't believe because I'm not convinced. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, just explain, like, what is it that didn't convince you? What is the. And it doesn't even have to be a philosophical argument. I'm not this has been annoying me. I said this to Dave and Joe and Philip in the in the chat in our WhatsApp. People keep calling me a philosophy guy. Guys, I'm not a philosophy guy. I don't have a philosophy background. I barely understand philosophy. Every time I've gone into a chat with Dave, he's blown my mind because he brings up something I can't argue with because I don't have good philosophical skills. I can't challenge it because I just don't know how to, right? And um, I understand psychology pretty well, so I can challenge things that are a bit more psychological based, like certain theory of mind stuff where I'm not like things like panpsychism and stuff. I can challenge that because I think that I have a good understanding of that stuff, um, but I can't challenge like other things. Um, and And then on Twitter, I just keep getting called a philosophy guy, and I'm not even talking about philosophy with them. I don't challenge them on philosophy. I can go into a conversation, not mention any philosophical concept one time. I can just talk about mental illness and psychosis and stuff like that, and people will still call me a philosophy guy. I can tell them my master's in psychology, and people will still call me a philosophy guy because I talk to Dave and Joe and Philip. It's not okay. Stop calling me a philosophy guy. I don't know who it's more insulting to, me or them. Because philosophy isn't even a science, man. Come on, like it doesn't even prove anything. What's the point in all those questions? What do they actually do? They have no real world usage. um, well, if the atheist is a former believer, they may be defensive because they've been defending themselves exhaustively, and the process is laborious to discuss. I agree with you. I have one issue with this, and that is someone who uh, is tired of being challenged about their atheism goes onto the internet to challenge Christians about their Christianity and doesn't expect to be challenged back. That tends to be what I see. I tend to be that I see people challenging Christians saying that Christian ideas are crazy and Christian ideas are weird and all this stuff. And then uh, and then they get challenged and then they're like, "Pardon and proof." I have to justify myself all the time. Why are you asking me these questions? Well, why are you asking them those questions? If you can't give it, don't take it. No, if you can't take it, don't give it. People need to be realize that that kind of thing is a two-way street, in my opinion. If they don't want to be challenged, they shouldn't be challenging people. They should just be helping other atheists. Which is kind of what I'm trying to do. Like I don't barely ever get challenged by Christians on my atheism because I don't tend to challenge Christians on their Christianity because that's not my interest. I'm not here to convert people. I'm here to help atheists be better atheists, essentially. not like that. There's a scale on what makes a good atheist, but in terms of like how they feel about their lives, how they cope with certain things that atheism comes along with atheism, such as um, feelings about bereavement and purpose and stuff like this. That's what I want to help people with, self-esteem. um so I don't really get challenged on my atheism. It's happened maybe one time on Twitter, The most people that challenge my atheism are actually atheists who I challenge on why they're like being insulting and saying that mental illness is that that all religion is a mental illness. That's who I get challenged by. They're like, "Are you even a real atheist?" And then I have to explain why I'm an atheist. And I'm probably more atheist than them anyway because I believe gods don't exist. I don't believe because I have become unconvinced. Ooh, nice play on words. Yeah, this is because he wrote this because he keeps blowing my mind with philosophy stuff. Yeah, thank you, Claire. We try and learn, but it's just too complex for us. I get it. Halo. Sorry, I didn't mean that's just in the chat. I shouldn't just click through every single one. You are a philosophy nerd by proxy. Deal with it. Same as I am an atheist by proxy. I am. I like philosophy now. I didn't used to like philosophy because I felt it was. I used to be one of those people that was like, I don't understand why we even need to ask these really vague questions that have no purpose. But now, I think since talking to Answers in Reason, the guys here, Philip, Joe, and Dave, they've helped me see the purpose of this. And I actually explained this in a Twitter thread to somebody about the purpose of philosophy and why it actually helps us understand things. Like for instance, thinking about whether other minds exist goes into deeper questions about other minds, such as at what point is someone a human by virtue of their mind? So, how do we treat people? Is it how? What are the moral standards around treating someone in a vegetative state or a coma? Um, how does that influence animals? Whether we think they have minds or not. How should we approach them from a moral perspective? And these are questions that currently um, are struggling to be answered by, especially around the moral ones. They can't be answered by science. Um, and like ethics, is entirely based on philosophy. So, like ethics of psychology studies, the ethics in psychology has been awful throughout history up until about like the 1990s, where it kind of improved to a certain extent. Maybe the 80s, more so the 90s, and then it's improved in the noughties and stuff. But that's purely philosophy. No, they know what they're saying. They can tell you're a philosophy guy because you look like you hang out in Starbucks all day. This is actually really funny because yesterday I drove down to my mum's because it was her birthday, and I went to a petrol station and the guy at the cash desk, I just bought a bottle of water and some fuel, and he went, "I'm going to ask you a question, really deep one. Are you who you think you are?" Oh no, he said, "Do you believe you are who you think you are?" And I was like, "I don't know." And he was like, "That's an interesting answer because um, people have this image in their head of who they think they are, and they might not be that person uh, in reality. So, do you think you are who you think you are?" And I was like, "I have no idea." He was like, "Cool, have a good night, thanks." I left. I was like, "That would have been a really interesting chat if I wasn't just buying fuel and going down to see my mum for her birthday." Like, oh, I would have stayed there and chatted if Izzy wasn't in the car just sitting there waiting for me. But I probably that would have been an interesting chat. I should have asked him for his details and got him onto an Airstream. So you do know philosophy. What was this in reference to, um, Dave? You're only judged by those you hang around. What you actually are is irrelevant. I don't think that's necessarily 100% true. I think self-image is very important. I think how we perceive ourselves can actually influence our behavior towards others anyway. So if we see ourselves as kind and caring and considerate, and actually, because people tend to have those kind of perceptions of themselves, they see themselves either in a better light or a worse light than reality. Um, you can use that in therapeutic interventions. So if somebody's being rude to someone, say one of the people I support is being rude to someone, I will say, you're a kind person, aren't you? But that wasn't very kind. And then they'll think about it and they'll go, yeah, and that's how I changed their behavior, is by matching their behavior to what we'd expect to see from that type of person, and then how they perceive themselves. So it is very useful to have that self image and to know what that self image is. And actually, I think building good self esteem can impact someone in a really good way, going forwards, because you get kinder behavior, more altruistic behavior from people that value themselves and think of themselves as good people. If someone thinks that they're a bad person, then they usually don't care. It seems like a lot of the aggressives fit into two camps. Either they're grassroots atheists, not deconverts, or those deconverts still angry at the stage of deconversion. Yeah, and I think America has a lot to answer for in this situation, because I think American atheism is influencing a lot of European atheism, because it's putting a lot of myths out there about what religion is like in other countries. Now, we do have some young earth creationists, we do have Catholics who are a bit more extreme, but generally speaking, our religion is milder and people don't take it so seriously. And they certainly aren't aggressive with it. But in these countries, they have something to fight against. Does that mean that they should paint all religious people with the same brush? No. They should fight against these specific institutions that are leading to their oppression. And that's it. They shouldn't fight against religion as a whole. Religion as a whole isn't inherently bad. It can do good for individuals, I think. Personally, I'm not a fan of the institutions in general. I think decentralization of religious institutions would be a positive step. But I think also people need to be taught of the things that are beneficial. If you're going out there and you're being aggressive, then you're not going to convert anyone really, or deconvert, whatever it is. You're going to see people resistant to it because of the way people are coming across. When actually they need to be taught you can cope with death. You don't need God, because that's where a lot of people's doubt comes in. I've designed a work around to being labelled an atheist. I don't believe in gods, but when called by a Christian, which I was last Friday, I would call myself a naturalist. Got to be careful with that one, though. Wait, this is important. You don't actually hang out at Starbucks all day. No, I don't. No, I prefer Costa. Costa coffee. Costa lot, I call it. Because it does cost a lot. When they ask what that is, I say the only thing I believe is in the planet upon which we live, and leave them stunned with no response, usually. I like that. Mm. Okay. I don't understand America that well, so. Oh, I love the answer I don't know and use it all the time. That also baffles people. Yeah, I think there's a comfort in saying I don't know about things, but also, you know, the one thing I think that frustrates me slightly with I don't know, and I'm not criticizing you, Sandy, at all. I think that there's power in it saying I actually don't know the answer to that, but that doesn't mean you can't have an opinion on it. So like, do I know that gods don't exist? No, I don't know that. There's various reasons why I believe gods don't exist. Okay, so I can still have an opinion without knowing. Um, just as I believe that there are other life forms in the universe. I don't know that for certain. I have an opinion on it. I believe it. I believe that there are. I think it would be silly not to believe that. But yeah, putting a philosophy degree to good use. Yeah, absolutely. I think he must have been, or either that or he was high. You said philosophy was all made up nonsense and proved nothing. That's what it is about. Remind me to put sarcasm tags on my comments for the hosts. Oh, did I misread something that was supposed to be sarcastic? Bayesian psychotherapy. I feel like I'm really behind. What was this in reference to, Dave? Oh, hi, Hans Frida. Is there loads of blaringly loud music? Was the music blaringly loud at the start, guys? I thought it was okay. I had it in my ears. So you want decentralized religions? Look no further than the American evangelical movement. The evangelical movement is specifically decentralized from Protestants. Right, so there are issues with decentralized religions as well. But I think the issues are less than large institutional religion, such as Catholicism. Like the Catholic Church has done a lot of horrible things in the past and influenced governments and protected horrible people. Um, so for me, uh, if there was a bunch of smaller independent churches, that would be preferable because I think that their influence on the world would be a lot less powerful. So that's my view. Now there are still issues there, but I just think that the pros outweigh the cons. So yeah, I hear you. I want to believe, lol. It would be pretty extreme to think humans are the only species in the universe. Exactly, the statistics outweigh. Like there has to be, right. It's just like the amount of stars there are. There are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on every beach in the world. So there has to be at least one other planet where there's some, at least probably hundreds of millions of other planets where there's some form of life. Do I think there's intelligent life within our grasp? Probably not. I think that intelligent life as we know it and we perceive it um, developed as specific under specific conditions, and I feel that what's more likely is plant life and like fungal that kind of life rather than bacteria, that kind of life rather than plants. So intelligent life I'm more skeptical about, but certainly some form of life that we know, that we understand, um, I think would exist. God damn it, Luke, keep up. If I have to keep explaining the jokes 5 minutes later, it ruins them, and they were barely jokes to begin with. But I'm trying to get to all the comments, Dave, and I'm not as good as Joe at this, so I'm sorry, okay? So, cognitive distortions. Let's talk about mass murderers and serial killers for a second. Serial killers, I think, maybe more. There's probably more likely to be some sort of psychopathology, such as a personality disorder or some sort of psychopathy. So, I think serial killers we can leave to one side in this conversation because actually thinking about differentiation, serial killers, mass murderers, and spree killers are all different types of things. They all have their own individual definition. So a serial killer is someone who kills multiple times with lots of time in between each kill. So you can have like someone that kills like 10 people, for instance, but they're spaced out over a period of time. So it could be like one a month for 10 months or one every 6 months for 5 years. Um, Mass murderers are people that kill. I think it's more than. I think each thing is more than one or more than two. I can't remember exactly, but each definition is more than. Let's say more than two. So mass murderer is someone that kills more than two people in one situation. So they'll kill a bunch of people in one go. And then a spree killer is someone that kills and in the same location. That's the important part. And then a spree killer is someone that kills multiple people at the same time, but in different places. So they'll kill one person at this house. They'll move immediately on to kill someone else. Move immediately on to kill someone else. Yeah. Um, so that's the difference between those things. Now, I think especially for mass murderers, I think most mass killings are are committed on the basis of ideology cognitive distortions, and usually in group out group biases. I think that when somebody is doing it, it's usually to make a statement based on an ideological concept. So, especially in America, where we're thinking about school shootings, for instance, it's usually to make a statement from that individual to the school and to their peers about what they've been put through and uh, how they respond to that, essentially. And that could either be like bullying or the incel movement or anything like that. Even terrorist attacks, they could essentially be distilled down to mass killings, but with a political or religious agenda. Um, that's essentially what forms a terrorist attack. That goes against the ideology or the concept of the nation. So they're essentially designed to make a political statement against the nation that they occur in. That's what makes a terrorist attack and cause terror within that nation. Um, that's essentially the definition. But if we distill it down, it's a mass murder, right? And it's based on ideology, and it's based on in group out group biases, and it's based on cognitive distortions about how the world works and what uh, how people view the world. So cognitive distortion in that situation is that um, I don't know if we're thinking about an Islamist terrorist, like an ISIS terrorist, um, then their cognitive distortions might be around how uh, British or American or whatever governments or the people in those represent their governments, and in order to make a statement against the government, we need to um, target the people that they represent. Yeah. So for me, and this was the point of debate with this individual, they were saying that no one would commit those acts if they were in their right mind. Now, there's two issues I have with that. Firstly, um, it reinforces the stereotype that mentally ill people are dangerous. Now, the statistics absolutely blow this out of the water. People who are mentally ill are more likely to be the victims of abuse and crimes than they are to be the perpetrator. Way more likely. People who don't have a mental illness are more likely to be perpetrators of crime. So there's no pathology usually. Now, if you think that a distortion in someone's thinking means they're not in their right mind, then I can see that argument to a certain extent. But that's not the same as having a pathology. Yeah? And if we think about it like, I don't know, in terms of physical things, how someone dresses is a statement about their character. How long they grow their hair or their hairstyle, yeah, it's aesthetic. That's a bad analogy. I was going to say how they look is not an illness, but they might get a broken leg, right? And both of those things are similar in that it's about their physicality, but it's not the same thing. Like it's not an illness or a disability, right? And it's the same thing with the mind. Cognitive distortions are just how people perceive the world and how they process information that's coming in, and they process it through a specific lens, which is the distortion. That doesn't mean that they're ill. That doesn't mean that they're unwell. It just means that they think differently to us, and that their decisions are based off of that thought processes rather than the thought processes we have. Yeah. I'll up you on all of it. I think there is a near 100% chance that there isn't only life on other planets, but I think there are specifically carbon-based human-like hominids life on other planet. Ooh, that is a claim, and you believe that claim. That's good, and you can believe that without evidence, right? People can believe things without evidence. Everyone believes things without evidence. Every single person. this whole atheist rhetoric about I don't believe things unless there's evidence for it is bollocks. Everyone believes things without evidence. Well, I have evidence. Okay, Lone Wolf. So tell me what your evidence is then. Is it statistics? Because that's not the evidence I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm talking about hard. We exist, right? So you think because we exist as people on other planets? Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. I see. This is an interesting idea because I'm pretty sure that the same conversation was probably had about life on other land, and specifically around humans on other land. Now, obviously, we populated the Earth, like we went places, right? We spread out. We didn't just miraculously spawn in multiple different locations with the same kind of genetic structure. But when people were discovering new land, they probably thought it was going to be there wasn't going to be anyone there because it's they hadn't been there, right? So they probably went places and then were shocked to find other people. And why would that be any different in the universe, except for the fact that we haven't traversed the universe yet? That's the only difference. But same concept, right? I think you're probably right. But I think maybe within our reach or that we'll ever meet them is astronomically low. I think it would probably be in some random part of the universe. Asteroids can carry the biological structures needed to seed living things, say with water bears. Who knows, maybe all the same stuff that seeded this planet, seeded some other. Yeah, but sometimes people think that panspermia is the concept, isn't it? Panspermia happened and it came from Mars. And that's a really interesting concept because we found like water on Mars, obviously, and some people have done some research into it, and they think that actually the beginnings of life would have been more suitable to Mars when life started here, and that actually it could be more likely that life started on Mars, and then something broke a piece of asteroid off or like a meteorite off of Mars, and then Mars came down here with the genetic material, and then our planet was better for incubating life in the way that it needed to produce flora and fauna, which I think is a really interesting concept. But I'm no astrobiologist, so I can't say how accurate that is. I just thought it was a cool idea. Cool. Um, I don't know how much else I've got to say. Is there any questions about cognitive distortions or in group out group how they influence in group out group biases? I might do a whole stream just on in group out group biases. I think that'd be really interesting. Um, or ideology and how that impacts on offending behavior or any other kind of behavior. Or does anyone want me to explain it within a certain group of people? Um, Otherwise, I think I'll probably start wrapping things up because uh, I have completely lost how much I've spoken about and I can't remember if I've said everything I've wanted to say, but I think I have. It's been an interesting stream. I think the important thing is with our thought processes because really we're the only ones that know what our thoughts truly are. We're the only ones that experience our thoughts. And when we're making decisions about uh, other people, when we're making decisions about how we treat other people and what we perceive other people to be, um, Lone Wolf has brought it back to drugs again. Humans live on other planets because DMT aliens cure all psychological ailments. Did you have that in a DMT experience? Is that why you're saying it? Um, when we're having our own thought processes and how we interact with other people, and when we're making assumptions about other people, they're based on biases that are attributable to our cognitive distortions. if we think about cognitive distortions as a lens at which we view the world through, our schemas, our preconceived concepts about how the world works and what the world is, what we expect the world to be like. Now they're important because they help us manage situations. If we have an expectation about the world is going to be like, then we know how to interact with it. We know what to expect when we're going to interact with someone socially, for instance, how to have a conversation, all that stuff. My mouth is really dry, so apologies for the coughing. But if we are having this lens, everyone has it, we need to be reflecting on how that might impact other people. When someone tells us we're acting in a certain way, rather than becoming defensive about it, we need to consider it. We need to um, really think about it and try and justify it. And if we can't justify it, if we end up becoming defensive about it, we need to look deep and see whether actually are we distorted in this area, or are we biased? Biased might be an easier thing to do. Oh, Sandy, nice to have you here. Thank you for coming. Go enjoy. Um, um, so that's what we need to do. We need to we need to consider our biases. We need to consider why we might be making that decision, why we might be commenting on that. And it's usually to do with upbringing. It's usually to do with culture, and it's usually to do with these cognitive distortions that have been passed on from other people into us. Politics, uh, peer groups, yeah. So don't take those things for granted. Don't just think this is how I know it is, so therefore it is. You know, consider other people's perceptions, consider other people's uh, experiences and how they may have formed their opinions. And what it will do is it will open your eyes. It will help you be more empathetic. It will help you be uh, better at addressing criticism of you and addressing other people's kind of concerns around maybe your behavior. But it also make you better at voicing your concerns to other people, um, and how they're interacting with you and how they're doing it, because you can explain it in a way that they'll understand rather than in a way that you'll understand, which is usually what happens. You have two people just explaining things in their own ways rather than trying to address it to other people. And that's not very good learning or teaching, yeah? And to end on Lone Wolf Usul, I don't need to consider my biases. You need to consider my biases. I'll consider your biases, and we'll both be considerably biased together. And I think that's a really funny place to stop. Thank you for joining. I've been Bearded Heretic. This has been Psyched, and it's been great to be here. And thank you for listening. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time with a subject that I don't know what it's going to be yet. So look forward to that. Make sure you join me. There is also a stream tomorrow and on Thursday from the regular Answers and Reasons crew, Dave and Joe. No idea what they're on, so just make sure you join them. They usually start at 9 o'clock and finish around between 11 and 1 o'clock, depending on the day. So, um, thank you very much for joining, and I'll see you in a bit. Bye.